Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of In-Depth D&D 5e Guides. Yes, this is my show where I go into the nitty-gritty of D&D classes and really talk about how they were designed to work and the kind of aspects of the class that you really should focus on if you want the class to really shine. And this is, for me, kind of a special episode. I mentioned, I think back in January, that I hadn't done these in a while, but I was going to do a new one for Warlock because the Artificer class was supposed to be coming out soon, and it did. Now, it did come out as Unearthed Arcana, not as like a book publication or anything, and thus far there has been no mention of it becoming AL legal, despite what they said, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years ago when they first put it on the DM's Guild. But it is here, and compared to the last iteration of the Artificer, this one is much better balanced. There's a couple things in it that I think could maybe either use some tweaking or maybe just will be a way for this class to shine in a different way than other classes. But for the most part, it's a really unique, from what I can tell, really entertaining and fun new class to play. Now, I've mentioned before in this series and another series, one of the unique things about 5th edition is every class plays very differently. Even from low levels, like first and second levels, the classes will play differently. And this is a pretty big departure from earlier editions like 3rd and 2nd edition, where all your melee classes, for the first like 3 to 5 levels, play the same. All your spell casting classes, again, play roughly the same. Mechanics-wise and just gameplay-wise. And it isn't until they get a few levels in that they really hit their stride and go, oh, okay, so this is why I'm a ranger and not a fighter. Things like that. 5th edition, everything plays very differently, very quickly. You can, being a sorcerer is very different from being a wizard. Being a paladin is very different than being a ranger, even though both are kind of hybrid spellcasters. They play massively different. And because of that, creating brand new classes is kind of a difficult thing because they have such a massive difference in playstyle that adding another class, generally it's going to feel like one of the other classes in one way or another. And I think the Artificer actually succeeds in making a very unique play style. Yeah, I'm interested to see. The other different thing about this is most of my experience for these classes comes from years of running games as a DM and running games at conventions and things like that, where I get to see such a massive collection of play styles and character builds and things like that I've seen just about everything. And then playing myself, playing these classes and doing theory crafting and stuff like that. With this one, I've never seen it played because it's brand spanking new. I personally haven't played it myself because, again, it's new. So a lot of this will be based on theory and me comparing it to abilities that other classes have and kind of inferring from there. But to be blunt, I won't be able to make a full judgment of this class until I get a chance to see it played. That being said, let's dive into the class. Because like I said, I think it's really, really cool. So the first thing you get right at first level, and I guess we should actually start with just kind of defining the class itself. It is a D8 hit dice, so it's lower end of hit points. You get proficiencies in simple weapons and then crossbows, basically. And then quite a few different tools. You get thieves' tools, tinker's tools, and a type of artisan's tools. And that's going to be very important for this class because tools is their thing. Artificers in lore are these magical crafters. They combine magic with technology to create really cool things. If you look at like the third edition Artificer, generally they would have like either crossbows or firearms, depending on the setting that you are in. They would have mechanical constructs they use. They would have all these little items and things that they tinkered and created with. Some of them would even replace limbs and things like that with mechanical constructs. You know, these are, you know, the cyborgs and you know, kind of weapon specialists almost. If you think into a more modern RPG, they're just constantly making new things, and it really feeds into the class itself and how they designed it. So that's that. We won't talk about equipment because it's kind of fairly standard. We will talk about first level. You get, I think, probably one of the most unique role-playing abilities I've seen as part of a base class. A lot of times you'll get role-playing abilities as part of your subclass. You'll get them, you know, later on. This is right first level. You get this thing called magical tinkering, and basically what you do is you can tinker with it, and you can give objects certain abilities. All of them are relatively mundane, but from a role-playing perspective, you can really have a lot of fun with these. So to just see some of the abilities you can give these items. Each item can only have one ability, and it has to be a relatively small item. It mentions you then touch a tiny non-magical object as an action and give it one of the following magical properties of your choice. So tiny basically means it doesn't take up a 5-foot square. So it's something you can hold in your hand, basically. And these are the properties. One, the object sheds bright light in a 5-foot radius and dim light for another 5 feet. So you have not a torch, because a torch is 30 feet bright, 30 feet dim, but you have a small personal light source that lights just your immediate area. Could be very, very useful in certain situations, could be not so useful, not 100% sure. Still very interesting. Second property is whenever tapped by a creature, the object emits a recorded message that can be heard up to 10 feet away. You utter the message when you bestow this property on the object, and that recording can be no more than 6 seconds long. So you basically can create kind of an answering machine type thing, or you could use this as kind of a makeshift messaging system. You pick up a stone, go, hey, there's some dudes over there, and you throw it, 30 feet to one of your allies. They pick it up, they tap it, and you can only hear it if you're within 10 feet of the item. So if you're 30, 40 feet away from the enemy, they won't be able to hear it, but you can send messages. I know, kind of a bizarre, weird thing to do. And again, there's a lot of other things you could use that for. That was just the first thing that popped into my head. The next one, the object continuously emits your choice of an odor or nonverbal sound, wind waves, chirping, or the like. The chosen phenomena is perceivable up to 10 feet away. Another really great kind of distracting type item. Again, imbue a rock with the smell of rotting meat, and you have yourself a stink bomb that you can throw and scare people away. Or other things like that. Just interesting stuff like that. And then the last one is a static visual effect appears on one of the object's surfaces. This effect can be a picture, up to 25 words of text, lines, and shapes, or a mixture of these elements as you like. You have a PowerPoint presentation. Literally, you take a canvas, touch it, and make it look whatever you want. It can't be really complex like a full map or something like that. But you could easily go, okay, here's where we are, here's where they are, here's a couple other things, and do very basic maps and things like that. You could even do like football plays. Have you ever seen like the X's and O football play setup things? You could do that with that. Again, none of this stuff is going to sway a battle. All of it, though, can make a really unique experience for the person playing the Artificer and their party. They can do things that you can't do with any other class. And I find that fascinating. The chosen property lasts indefinitely. And as an action, you can touch the object and end the property early. And you can give this magic feature to multiple objects. And the maximum number of objects you can affect at one time is equal to your intelligence modifier. So, again, the higher your intelligence, the more of these things that you can do, and the cooler stuff you can do with it. Overall, like I said, I think it's really interesting. It's a cool first level ability for the class, and yeah. Second thing, you get at first level, and remember, with any class we've talked about before, you should get the kind of defining features of the class within the first 2 levels. So the things that are really going to define how the class plays and are what the class is going to build on should show up within the first 2 levels. And this one, 100% that happens. So the second thing you get is spellcasting. It is a spellcasting class. But the interesting thing about this is they actually, their spellcasting foci are tools. Because, again, they're not casting spells like the other classes. They are harnessing magic through the use of technology. And this is one of the cool things. They actually have a little sidebar in the thing that mentions when you cast spells, think about how you're doing it. You're not casting a spell like a wizard. You're creating little items that let you use magic. So this is, I think, the first class I've seen that actually tells you, hey, flavor text this. It will be fun. And we've talked about flavor texting in my other series. And so Play Your Faves has a lot of flavor texting. So this class actually, as part of the class, mentions, hey, flavor texting works really well with this class. You should do it. But says you don't have to. You won't be limited if you don't. Just remember, your focus, instead of using a rod or a staff or a wand, you use tools as your focus. And I think that's really, really cool. And again, it fits into the class idea of these are tinkerers, these are magitech guys, stuff like that. The next thing is talks about the tools, talks about cantrips. As far as spellcasting classes, this is what's called a half caster, meaning if you were to multi-class with the Artificer, when you're trying to figure out your spellcasting level, you would take half of your Artificer levels rounded down to figure out your total spellcasting level. And it also means their spell spells never go higher than 5th level. They don't get spell slots as fast. It's a half caster, very much like a paladin or a ranger. These are all half casters. So even compared to other half casters, though, they do have a pretty limited cantrip pool, but we'll talk about later the things they do to make it not quite as limited. You actually only start with 2 cantrips, which is a little bit low compared to some other classes. And they actually have their own spell list that I'll talk about in just a little bit here. But none of the spells are really groundbreaking or anything. They're spells that make sense for the class, except for one. There's one brand new spell, and I'll talk about that in a little too, because it's definitely a defining feature of the class. So cantrips, you get 2 cantrips. The other thing that's unique about this class compared to any others is when you gain a level in this class, you can replace one of the Artificer cantrips with another cantrip from the spell list. So you're never limited. Like other classes, once you learn your cantrips, that's it for the most part. You don't get to just pick and swap and choose your cantrips. Other spells, a lot of times there are ways to swap and choose, but your cantrips are your cantrips are your cantrips. This one, and again, it leans into that kind of tinkering aspect. Every level, you can change up a cantrip. If you're not using that one very much, or you think the specific area you're in, this is going to be more useful, change your cantrip. Really interesting. The other thing is how they prepare spells. Again, they are a half caster, but they have access to the entirety of the Artificer spell list. Very similar to a cleric or a paladin or a ranger, where every morning they just pick the spells that they want to use. And actually, ranger I don't think does that. I think it's only paladin and cleric. It's a divine spellcasting feature, and I may be wrong about that, because I think druids might be able to do that too. But anyway, it's not something you see with arcane spellcasters at all. It just doesn't happen. They learn spells in very specific ways. So this one, like I said, I find it interesting that every morning, again, as part of that kind of tinkering aspect, they can just choose the spells they think will be most useful for that day. And then their spellcasting ability is intelligence, which makes sense. And they can also do ritual casting, which, again, makes sense. Spell list, again, not an incredibly bizarre list. They have a few ritual spells. The one thing that does make the Artificer very unique is they have a first level spell called Arcane Weapon. And the basics of the spell is you can cast it on a weapon. Its concentration for up to an hour. Cast it at higher levels. I'll look at it in a little bit. You can get it to last up to 8 hours. But it makes your weapon do an additional D6 of one type of damage, mostly elemental, which I think maybe poison is as well in there. But anyway, for a first level spell, that's a pretty big deal. The closest they have of something like that is probably elemental weapon, which is a third level spell, and it allows a D4 of damage every time you hit with it. The difference being you also get a +1 to the attack and damage rolls with elemental weapon, and if you cast it at higher levels, it turns into a +2 2d4 and eventually a +3 3d4. So the damage doesn't scale, just the time, but still for a first level spell, that's a pretty useful spell if you're going to be using weapons. And since this is a half caster, you are going to be using weapons at least a little bit. So it's a unique thing. It's very much something that makes sense with the Artificer because, again, they're constantly modifying their weapons and stuff. It wouldn't be outside of the question for them to, create something that sets their blade on fire or makes their arrows emit acid or something like that, But, yeah, that's the one thing where I'm like, you know what? That could be a little bit overpowered. Especially since the only things similar to it are hex, damage-wise, are hex and hunter's mark. And those mark a, those mark a, an enemy rather than a weapon and require you, when that enemy dies, to move the mark as a bonus action, where this doesn't. So that's where I kind of get this, well, okay, it might be a little bit overpowered, but we'll see. Again, I want to see it actually used in combat before I say, maybe we need to nerf that. Otherwise, everything else on the spell list is pretty, standard stuff you would think an Artificer would use. They have things like Cure Wounds. They have Shield of Faith to make you, harder to hit. Grease, which, other things like Fabricate at 4th level, Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum, all these things that make sense for an Artificer to have. After that, we get to the 2nd level, and this is the big other thing that really makes the Artificer unique, and that is infuse item. In lore for Artificers, again, they are magical crafters. They create magic items. They create, magical constructs and things like that. That's what Artificers do. In 5th edition, magic items are designed to be much more rare than in earlier editions. And so the idea of a class that creates magic items and things like that didn't really make sense with how 5th edition ran. And I think this infuse item really kind of makes sense in the 5th edition world where magic items are more powerful but more rare. This makes sense. So the way that infuse item works is basically after a long rest, you can touch a number of items that there's a column on their class table that says, at 2nd level you can infuse 2 items. I think by 20th level you can do up to 5 items simultaneously. Basically, however many you can do, at the end of a long rest, you touch them and you give them certain properties. And the properties in the sheet are listed at the end of the class. And normally I read I do these by literally just going down the class sheet, and I address things when they come up on the document. This one, because it's such a defining feature of the class, I'm actually, as soon as I talk about how it works, I'm going to actually go through all the infusions and just show you how interesting a character you can create with this. So anyway, so the basics of it: end of a long rest, you touch a number of items that you can, and you can infuse one of these properties in them. Each infusion has a specific type of item it can infuse. So some infusions work on boots, some infusions work on armor, some infusions work on weapons, So you have to have an item that it can infuse. But once you do, that infusion lasts indefinitely until you either end it or you cast another infusion, and then the oldest one, once you reach your limit, the oldest one just goes away. So you actually have a limited number of infusions that you start with 3, I believe. It says in the document, it says pick 2 Artificer infusions to learn here, but if you look at the actual table, it says at 2nd level 3 infusions, and then at 4th level 4. So I'm going to go with the idea that it was just a mistype and it's supposed to be 3 there. But you start out with 3 infusions, you go all the way up to 8 at level 19 and 20. We'll talk about the infusions in just a second, like I said. And then infusing the item, like I mentioned before, you touch, it has to be a non-magical item, so you can't infuse a magic item with another ability. And infusing it does turn it into a magic item, albeit temporarily. If the Artificer dies, the infusion fades after a number of days equal to their intelligence modifier. And if you unlearn the infusion, which I'll talk about in a second, you also, any item that was infused with that turns to mundane. The other thing, when you infuse it, if the item requires attunement, you can instantly attune to it at that point as well. But the Artificer is not the only person that can use the infused items. And that's the other thing that makes this class so cool, is that you can infuse items for your allies. So this is a really cool support class, or it can be a very cool support class, or it can just be a very solo focused class where you just pick infusions that will help you, so you can help the party just by having a strong character, or you can pick infusions that help the whole party and spread out your infusions. But this is really going to define how you play the character. Like I said, they remain indefinitely. Talked about what happens if you die. And yeah. So now, like I said, the document lists them at the end. I want to talk about them now because, again, they massively change how the class is played. The majority of these infusions you can only learn once. There's one that you can actually learn multiple times. And the majority of the infusions, because you can only learn them once, you can only infuse one weapon with it. So like there are infusions that let you, or one item, there are infusions that let you infuse weapons. That would mean you would need to use separate infusions if you wanted to dual wield, for instance. So let's start with the first infusion. Now, some of the infusions do require you to be a certain level before you can use them. And it mentions that as a prerequisite. It'll say, like, for the first one, it's a 4th level Artificer infusion. Yeah, and then it says what kind of item can be infused with it. So the first one is Boots of the Winding Path, which is again, 4th level Artificer, and it's a pair of boots. While you're wearing these boots, and the boots require attunement. While you're wearing these boots, a creature can teleport up to 15 feet as a bonus action to an unoccupied space the creature can see. The creature must have occupied that space at some point during the current turn. So this basically means you can move your character and as a bonus action pop back to kind of like a tracer type thing. If you've ever played Overwatch, you can sit there and just rewind yourself to a previous point. You don't get any hit points back like Tracer does, but you can do that. And for that creates a really interesting kind of hit and run kind of attacker. With these boots, you can run up to someone, attack them, and then blink back, and they can't do any sort of opportunity attack or anything, and then use any remaining movement to get somewhere safe. You can even do something as unique as if you're up, like, in a tree or something, as long as you don't travel more than 15 feet, like you drop 10 feet, move 5, attack someone, you can teleport yourself back up into the tree and then climb a little bit higher. Really interesting things like that gives this very much a hyper mobile hit and run style character. And it can even be used to, set off traps and things like that and go, oh crap, blink, and get out of the way of the trap. So, interesting thing. The next one is a little bit more standard. The infusion is called Enhanced Defense, a suit of armor or a shield. The creature gains a +1 to armor class while wearing the armor or wielding the shield. And once you reach 12th level, it turns into a +2. So that basically means you can make your armor a +1 armor. Really useful, or a +1 shield. Really useful, really simple, and not difficult to figure out how to use it. This is a great way to either protect yourself, or if you have a tank or something and you think they could really use it, just touch their armor instead of yours, and they become even more difficult to hurt. So this is, again, the other thing that's nice about this, it doesn't require attunement. So a lot of +1 armors and magic armors and things like that will require some sort of attunement. So this is a great way to get around the attunement if you do have an ally or yourself that has quite a few magic items, and you want they want to be able to use all these items but don't want to sacrifice defense for it. Super easy for that. Next one, Enhanced Weapon. Exact same thing, but with a weapon. Now, this is one of the things that kind of limits you if you want to be like a dual wielding artificer, is since you can only enhance one weapon, you have to use a different weapon enhancement type thing on your second weapon. And they do have other ones, so you can effectively dual wield if you want, but they're all going to do different things. So that's the only kind of limitation to that. The next one, this is another one that I just think is massively useful. And it's called Many-Handed Pouch. It's a 4th level ability, and the items that you use it for is anywhere from 2 to 5 pouches. Basically, the infused pouches all share one interdimensional space of the same capacity as a single pouch. Thus, reaching into any of the pouches allows access to the same storage space. And you can do that as long as the pouches are within 100 miles of each other. At first, this sounds weird. So it's like, well, you're taking 5 pouches and you're making 4 of them kind of worthless because you only have the space of one pouch. Yes, but if each member of your party has that pouch, and maybe that's the pouch where you keep your potions. No one is ever without a potion, because everybody, you have a group potion thing. Or if you have group money, where everybody has their own money, but sometimes you have like a group money fund as well, keep your group money in the many-handed pouch. You can even use it to transfer items between characters that are really far away. If a character needs a key or something, put it in the pouch, the other person can get it up to 100 miles away. When you combine that with that ability to put messages in things, now you actually do have a really cool messaging system, because the Artificer can go, hey guys, we're going for shawarma after this. Put it in the pouch, and everyone can go, oh, okay, put it back in. Everybody can learn it without having to make any throws. And again, it can go up to 100 miles. So this is such a really interesting thing that I think can be massively useful if used the right way. But I also think it's something that a lot of people are going to just look over, because like, well, that doesn't seem like a very useful thing. Compared to like enhanced weapon, why would I ever want to do that? Because of the reasons I just told you. Everybody always has potions on them. Everybody always has antidotes on them if you're fighting monsters that poison you. Or everybody always has holy water on them if you're fighting undead creatures or vampires. Vampires are really bad, and they regain hit points. But if you hit them with radiant damage, which holy water does radiant damage, it turns off their healing. Massively useful. Next one, this is an 8th level Artificer ability. It's called Radiant Weapon. And this is a simple or martial weapon, and this actually does require attunement. And basically, not only does the weapon grant a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls with it, and it's a magic weapon at that point. While holding it, you can use a bonus action to make it emit bright light 30 foot, dim light 30 foot. So it basically gives you a torch, kind of useful. And then as a reaction, immediately after being hit by a melee attack, the wielder can blind the attacker. They make a con save against the Artificer's spell save. So not the person wielding it, but the Artificer's spell save DC. And if they fail it, they're blinded until the end of the attacker's next turn. So not only are they blinded for this turn, they're blinded for their next turn as well. You can only use that once until the wielder finishes a short or long rest. But still super useful. And again, if you're doing the dual wielding Artificer, that would be a way to have 2 magic weapons for your Artificer. So kind of cool, kind of different than the enhanced weapon, especially with the attunement requirement, and it only does a +1, whereas enhanced does +2 after 12th level. But it gives you options. The next one, I think, is the one that Artificers will use the most and will give the most variety to Artificers. And it's called Replicate Magic Item. This is, I believe, the only infusion you can use multiple times. And every time you use it, you pick a new magic item. Now, what that is there is a list of magic items. And they're separated. There's technically 3 lists, and they're separated into levels. You have your basic magic items. You have your 12th level magic items. You have to be a 12th level Artificer to do them, and then 16th level magic items. And what these are is basically you can make these magic items by infusing them into a mundane version of it. So, like the magic items they have for any level Artificer are Alchemy Jug, Bag of Holding, Cap of Water Breathing, Cloak of the Manta Ray, Goggles of Night, Lantern of Revealing, Rope of Climbing, Sending Stones, Wand of Magic Detection, and Wand of Secrets. So it doesn't matter what level Artificer you are, you can take this infusion and you can create this literally every day if you want to. And the item, again, it remains indefinitely, so you can just leave it as that magic item, or you can create a different infusion for a day, and then the next day you can create it again. This basically lets the Artificer create magic items, which is what they've done in every previous edition. That's what Artificers did. And I think this is a really effective way of not making it massively overpowered. A character that can make magic items in 5th edition can very quickly become super overpowered, because there are magic items that are really useful. Like I said, they're supposed to be rare, so magic items in 5th edition tend to have a little more oomph to them than say previous editions. So yeah, I think this is a really effective way of limiting what they can do. Like, in order for you to use use one of these magic items, you have to give up one of your infusions to do it. And the other infusions are kind of what define the class. So you have this really great give and take. The other thing is it does mention which of the items require attunement. So before you learn the item, you can kind of know, all right, is this going to be even more of a pain and a drain than I want it to be. As you get to higher levels, I'm not going to go through everything, but you can make things like gauntlets of ogre power, headband of intellect, winged boots are 12th level items. When you get up to the 16th level, you have belt of hill giant strength, cloak of the bat, bracers of defense, ring of the ram is another really fun one. These are all things that you can make. You just have to use one of your infusions to do it. So yeah, I think that's going to be the really defining thing of the the game. And like I don't know if I mentioned it. Every I believe it's every level. I'm gonna go back real quick to confirm this. Infusing. Whenever you gain a level in this class, you can replace one of the infusions you learned with a new one. So this is, if you get this replicate magic item, and as you get higher, your bag of holding just isn't as useful anymore because you've got a real bag of holding. You don't need it anymore. Level up, change what you can do. You may even do it when you reach 12th level. You may just stop using the low level ones and change, like you had goggles of night, but you now have someone that can cast dark vision. It's not really worth it. So you change your goggles of night into a boots of elven kind, or a cloak of protection. Really useful things. So that's that. And like I said, that's the only one you can learn more than one. The next infusion after that is resistant armor, which is an 8th level artificer spell, and that basically it gives the armor resistance to a certain damage type. The armor does require attunement, but again, it's another thing that can be really useful in a pinch. If you're going up against a red dragon, infusing your armor with fire resistance will be significantly more useful than having a +1 or a +2 armor class 100% of the time. So the next one, and this is actually my favorite because it allows you to do a playstyle that I don't think the game supports very well yet, and that is a returning weapon. The item is a simple or martial weapon with the thrown property, and what it does, it gives a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls to it, and the item returns when you throw it. So this basically means you can make your own dwarven thrower without the extra giant damage. You can have a throwing dagger or a javelin or spear that you can just throw, and it just keeps coming back to you. Throw again and again and again. I love this idea because it creates a ranged class that doesn't use a bow. And really, in 5th edition, it's bow or crossbow. That's all you can use for ranged weapon characters. This lets you use daggers or throwing hammers or darts or whatever you want. And I just think it's really, really cool, and I think it makes a very unique playing style. So that's the infusions. Like I said, it really changes how you play the game using these infusions. So that's why I wanted to do them right when we talk about them right at 2nd level. The rest of this gets a little bit more simple. You can choose your specialist. You become either an alchemist or artillerist for at 3rd level, and that's one of the things I'm not particularly fond of this class, and this is just a personal nitpick thing. I don't like having a class with only 2 subclasses. The druid and the ranger both have this issue, and the ranger I think just doesn't do it very well in the player's handbook. When you get to Xanathar's guide, they expand it, and it actually becomes a pretty useful class. But in the player's handbook, the ranger is just a really limited class, especially since the Beastmaster is kind of a broken underpowered class. Druid is a little bit nicer because the Circle of the Moon has a bunch of different specializations inside of that, so it doesn't really feel as much like there's only 2 classes. So that's the only thing I don't like about this, is I would have preferred a third subclass. But, you know, with what they have, both subclasses make sense, and I'll talk about them in a minute here. Next, at 3rd level, you can double your proficiency bonus for any ability check that you make using tools. So that, especially since thieves' tools are something that you're proficient with, that can be really useful. You can turn into kind of a pseudo rogue at that point, because again, you're a tinkerer, so you're really good with stuff like that. 4th level, your standard ability score improvement stuff, 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19, basic stuff. 5th level, you get what's called arcane armament, which is basically extra attack by a different name. The limitation with this is you have to use a magic weapon to get the extra attack, which again should not be difficult for the Artificer because they can make their own magic weapons. But yeah, so that's that really simple. You remember earlier when I talked about cantrips and how while they have a limited number of them, it's not as limiting. Well, 10th level, you get the right cantrip for the job, and it really kind of fixes any issues you might have with the limited number of cantrips. Basically, anytime you finish a short or long rest, you can replace one of the Artificer cantrips you know with another cantrip from the Artificer spell list. So you really aren't limited at all in your cantrip choice. You technically have access to all the cantrips. You can just only change one per short or long rest. Again, really fits into that theme of the Artificer being a tinkerer and constantly like changing things and modifying things. You know, makes perfect sense. Then 18th level is another really interesting thing that makes the Artificer a very unique class, and I think really rewards you for staying just a single class all the way to 18th level. You get what's called Spells Storing Item at 18th level. And basically what it is every time you finish a long rest, you can touch one simple or martial weapon or an item that you can use as a spellcasting focus, which different subclasses have a few extras, but probably you'll be using a weapon for these. And store a spell with it, choosing one 1st or 2nd level spell from the Artificer spell list that requires one action to cast, and you don't need to have the spell prepared. When a creature has that object in hand, and it doesn't have to be you, it can be anyone, they can take an action to produce the spell's effect from it using your spellcasting modifier. And the object, or the spell, stays in the object until it has been used a number of times equal to twice your intelligence modifier, or until you use this feature again. So that seems slightly confusing. The basics of it: you can take an item, cast a 2nd level spell into it, and then depending on your intelligence modifier, which by the time you're 18, you should have a 20 intelligence. There really isn't a reason for you to have lower than that by 18. So that means now that item can cast that spell at that level 10 times. So we've talked about before, this is a half caster. It doesn't have anywhere near as many spell castings as higher level classes. This changes that drastically. And depending on what you put into it, you can put into, this would be funny, you can put into a sword a Cure Wounds spell. So someone else can just be holding their Cure Wounds sword and can go over and touch somebody with it and cast a 2nd level Cure Wounds spell on them. to 10 times. Massively useful. Other spells that can be as useful in just crazy things. Blur. Blur is a massively useful spell. It basically makes makes everyone have disadvantage on attack rolls against you. Invisibility, 2nd level spell. You can just blink out of existence. Very, very useful. Magic weapon is another one that's very useful. Or that arcane weapon that we talked about before. Being able to give yourself extra damage. Massively useful. Even other things like lesser restoration or aid, or like I said, cure wounds. Even like Sanctuary or Shield of Faith. These are all really useful spells that you can just really get the ability to cast basically 10 times a day. Massively useful. And it's not just the Artificer. The Artificer can use them. Don't get me wrong. It's not that you can't use them. It's just this gives other members of your team that normally wouldn't have that kind of ability, like giving your Barbarian an item that lets him cure wounds is massively useful, because your Barbarian is going to be probably the last person that falls. They have tons of hit points. They have resistance to tons of stuff. They're just a sponge, but they can't cure or anything. Well, they can with this, and they don't have to have another spellcasting ability to be able to do it. They use yours. So, yeah, I think that is probably the coolest 18th level ability I've seen. Finally, 20th level, Soul of Artifice. Basically, it allows you to attune up to 6 magic items instead of the normal 3. And for each magic item that you are attuned to, you get a bonus to all saving throws for each one. So if you have 6 magic items attuned to you, you have a +6 to all of your saving throws. Again, it's a 20th level ability. It makes the Artificer pretty good at dodging spells and things like that. I think the spell storing item is significantly more useful than Soul of the Artifice. So I could almost see them being flipped, but I like Soul of the Artifice being the 18th level ability, and I would always want to see something more from the. I mean, yeah, being able to attune to twice as many magic items is a really big deal. I don't know. That was something from the previous version, so maybe that's why I'm not as impressed with it. So finally, this is going a little bit long, but again, it's a brand new class. Let's talk about specialties, or the specialists. Like I said, there's 2. There's the Alchemist and the Artillerist, and each one's going to have a slightly different focus. Both of them can be very, very good in an offensive manner and in a support manner, depending on how you want to build it. So none of these really limit you in your ability to do things. They're just going to let you do them in different ways. The Alchemist is your standard, potion hound. All their stuff is going to have to deal with poisons and acids and stuff like that. They are a little more keen towards being a support class. They get a few more things that allow them to heal. And they also get this really cool pet that I think is significantly better than the Beastmaster Ranger pet, which is a joke, to be honest. So first things first, they get Tools of the Trade, which gives them proficiencies in alchemist supplies and herbalism kit. And they get a set of alchemist supplies and an herbalism kit for free, because they've been tinkering for 3 levels. They just made it themselves. And then they have a thing about crafting. If you craft a magic item in the potion category, it takes you a quarter of the normal time, and it costs you half as much as usual gold. So they can make potions and things like that. I don't know too many people that use the item crafting system in 5th edition, because it's a what do you call it's a optional system. But with this, it's designed to kind of work hand in hand with that. The other thing that each of the classes get is they give you extra spells that you just know. You always have them prepared, kind of like a cleric in that regard. So these spells are, for the alchemist, are things like Purify Food and Drink, Melf's Acid Arrow. At high levels, they get Cloud Kill and Raise Dead. So they have a nice balance between like party helping and I'm going to kill everything spells. Kind of cool. The other thing you get at 3rd level is what's called the Alchemical Homunculus. This is, you basically build a homunculus, which is a mini creature. And you have a pet. In combat, it goes on the same initiative order that you do, but it does have its own turn. And it takes its turn immediately after yours. And the only action it takes on its turn is the dodge action, unless you take a bonus action on your turn to command it to take one of the actions on its stat block, which I'll talk about in a second, or to take the dash, disengage, or help action. And if you cast Mending on it, it regains 2d6 hit points, and if it's died within the last hour, you can burn a spell slot to bring it back as an action. So it's a really cool, unique thing. You have this little mini minion that can help you out, and you can use a cantrip, Mending, to heal it. So kind of cool. The thing that makes it useful is that its hit points and attack and damage value get better as you gain levels. And that is super important. It's one of the reasons why most other pet classes do not do well in 5th edition, because their pets never get any better. The Beastmaster Ranger, when you first get your a beast companion at 3rd level, they actually can do quite a bit, and they're actually useful. By the time you reach 10th or 11th level, they're super easy to kill. They can be knocked out with 1 or 2 hits. They don't do much damage. They can't hit much of anything because their attack bonuses are really low. They're just extra weight that ends up being more of a hindrance than a help. This, because things level up as you get higher, the armor class doesn't. It's just 13. But again, using something like Shield of Faith, you can make it a little bit buffer if you need to. Hit points are 5 times your Artificer level plus your intelligence modifier. So that means every time you gain a level, your homunculus gets a little stronger, meaning it's not going to die at 10th or 11th level just because it gets hit by a really strong attack. At 10th level, it's going to have a minimum of 50 hit points plus your intelligence, which would probably be about 4 at least. So like 54, 55 hit points at 10th level. Much better than like I'd have to look. It actually might be a little lower than a bear. I can't remember what the bear that you can use as a pet actually has. But anyway, so that's really nice. And it also lets you kind of have this feeling that it's getting better with you. The other thing, it's immune to acid and poison damage. Very useful. It can't be charmed, exhausted, or poisoned. It has dark vision up to 60 feet, which is kind of useful. And then whenever your proficiency bonus increases, its acid spittle attack, which I'll talk about in a second, goes higher, and then the damage it does goes higher, and then it has perception +4 and stealth +4, so that goes higher whenever your proficiency bonus increases. So all of that actually makes it a pretty useful companion, even if you're only ever using it for the help action. Now, in order for it to do anything other than dodge, you have to use your bonus action. But with the fact that you're spellcaster and you have cantrips and things like that and fusions, there's a good chance you really won't be using your bonus action for much, other than, again, if you're a dual wielder, you might be using it for your dual wielding. But with so many of the abilities being limited to like one weapon, single wielding wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. And then your bonus action, you can do anything from their attack that they can always do is Acid Spittle, which is a 30-foot range attack, and it does 1d6 plus 2 acid damage. The plus 2 gets higher every time your a proficiency bonus goes up. So that's kind of useful. And as much as 1d6 doesn't seem like a ton, that's the same as a short sword in your offhand. So it's kind of like you have a ranged dual wielding built into it. So somewhat useful. The other thing it can do is what are called alchemical salve. They can do this 3 times a day, and it has 3 different options it can do. One, it can create a salve that gives the target a flying speed of 10 feet for 10 minutes. So if you have to get over a chasm and you have one party member that has no way to do it, boom, they have 10 feet of flying speed for 10 minutes. The next one I think is probably the most useful. It's called Inspiration. Basically, it can gain advantage on ability checks for the next hour. The target gets to choose the ability check either before or after rolling the check, and they can use it on a number of checks equal to your intelligence modifier. So this basically gives, doesn't work on attacks, but this will give people advantage when they actually need it. A lot of times you'll cast a spell that gives advantage, and they'll use it and they'll, I rolled an 18 and a 19. I didn't really need the advantage. This, they don't actually have to use the advantage until they see the roll. And it's any ability check. So it could be stealth, it could be athletics, it could be anything that they just need an ability check. Now again, it doesn't work for saves, it doesn't work for attack rolls, but it's still a massively useful thing. And then the last one is a resilience, that the target gains a number of temporary hit points equal to 2d6 plus your intelligence modifier. This is something I don't see a lot of people thinking about, but temporary hit points can get you out of unconsciousness. So this is a really great way to get someone out of, if they've rolled 2 failed death saves and no one's near enough to heal them, or you don't have any healing potions or something, you have your homunculus go over, give them temporary hit points. After combat ends, the temporary hit points are gone. I think they only last, I think it's like 10 minutes or something. So you have to heal them with something before they're gone or they're unconscious again. But great way to bring people back. Because it's only 2d6 plus your intelligence mod, it's not going to be a game-breaking thing. But a great way to save people that need it. So that's the homunculus. 6th level, you have alchemical mastery. Basically, if you are doing either acid or poison damage, you can add your intelligence modifier to run one roll of the damage. When you're casting a spell that does either acid or poison damage, you can add your intelligence modifier to the damage, basically. Or if you're healing, you can add your intelligence modifier to the roll. So with Cure Wounds, you already add your intelligence modifier. This lets you basically double your intelligence modifier to the healing. So pretty useful. The other thing that it gives you is you can cast Lesser Restoration without expending a spell slot a number of times per day equal to your intelligence modifier. So up to 5 times a day eventually. This is really useful because the thing that you will use that most often is the paralyzed condition. That can be cured with Lesser Restoration. Paralyzed is really, really bad. Any melee attacks made within 5 feet are insta-crits. You lose your turn. Like, it is a great way for a character to die. This gives you up to 5 castings of Lesser Resto, which is a 2nd level spell, for free. Another thing that kind of offsets the half-caster aspect of the Artificer. The next one, ability you get is Chemical Savant, which is 14th level. Your resistance to acid and poison damage, and you're immune to the poison condition. And now you can cast Greater Restoration once per day. Thank you, phone. Without expending a spell slot, and without providing the material components. Greater Restoration, even more useful. The big thing that Greater Resto cures is exhaustion. And in certain instances, it also cures madness, which is a really tough thing to deal with, depending on the campaign that you're running. So both of those, very, very useful, and you get them for free. So that's the Alchemist. The Artillerist, kind of similar, but a little bit more combat focused, a little less support focused, but there still is support built into it. Proficiencies, you get Smith's Tools and Woodcarver's Tools. And you also get the ability to use rods, staffs, and wands as spellcasting focuses. Excuse me. And you get a non-magical wooden wand for free because you've carved one. So now you can use wands as a focus. And then if you craft a magic item in the wand category, same thing as potions for alchemists, quarter time, half cost. Artillerist has extra spells, like I mentioned before, and they have a little bit more combat focus. Things like Shield, Scorching Ray, Wall of Fire, Cone of Cold, things like that. But again, the defining feature of the Artillerist is Arcane Turret. The way they describe it in here, it's complicated. The basics of it are, it has 18 AC, and it has hit points equal to 5 times your Artificer level. Very similar to the Homunculus, without the extra intelligence modifier hit points. It's immune to poison, psychic, immune to poison and psychic damage, and all conditions. So it can't be paralyzed or prone or anything like that. And all of its ability scores are 10. So that's the basics of it. You can basically launch it on any horizontal surface as an action. You can just send out this turret. The turret can move 15 feet in a turn. And you actually have 3 different turrets that you can make, though you're limited to 1 turret per day for free, and any additional turrets you have to burn a spell slot for. So that's what they are. Now, to go into the different turrets and what they can actually do. As an action, you can command your turret to detonate, and then as a to just blow up if you need it. And as a bonus action, I got these mixed up. As a bonus action, you can cause the turret to activate and do its special ability as long as you're within 60 feet. And as part of that bonus action, you can make it walk up to 15 feet. So the 3 turrets. You have a flamethrower turret, a force ballista turret, and a defender turret. Flamethrower, pretty simple. It makes a 15-foot cone. Any creature in it has to make a dex save versus your spell save DC. They take 1d8 fire damage on a save, or half as much on a success. And the fire ignites anything that can be ignited. The damage doesn't sound that great because, again, it's just 1d8. But again, when you realize that you can do this as a bonus action, you basically have kind of a scaled-down version of a Burning Hands that you can do every turn for 10 minutes. I forgot to mention the turret lasts for 10 minutes. So it's kind of useful. It's a great area attack if you are fighting a swarm of something. It's a great way to do that. If you have much fewer enemies, The Force Ballista, you make an attack roll using your spellcasting modifier, your spell attack modifier, and on a hit it takes 2d8 force damage, which is one of the few types of damage that you don't really see resistance to, and the creature is pushed 5 feet away from the turret. So that not only does it do more damage, as a bonus action you can just add 2d8 damage, really useful. You also can use it to push targets and kind of move them as a way to control the battlefield. So another kind of really useful thing. And the last one is Defender. It emits a burst of positive energy that grants itself and each creature of your choice within 10 feet of it a number of temporary hit points equal to 1d8 plus your intelligence modifier. So this, again, is a really great support thing. Basically, every turn, you can give everybody a d8 plus, 3 to 5, as long as they're close to the turret. This is a great way to deal with those battles that are just, that are just chipping your hit points away. The Defender turret will kind of reduce the amount of chipping that happens, because every turn it's going to give them extra temporary hit points that they can use to buff. Now, temp hit points don't stack, so remember that when you're doing this, you're not getting more and more and more. They just replace. But again, it's a really great way to get fallen allies back up. Even if you can't heal them, you can just keep giving them temp hit points. And again, it reduces the brunt of taking attacks every single turn. The next thing you get for the Artillerist is 6th level. You get Wand Prototype. And basically what it is you can infuse a wand with a cantrip. Only you can do it, or only you can use it. But basically, whenever you're holding the wand, you can use your action to cast that cantrip. It has to have a casting time of 1 action. And any damage rolls you make for the cantrip gains a bonus equal to your intelligence modifier. So really useful. It has to be Artificer cantrip, so you can't, mess with the system by, putting a, learning Eldritch Blast and putting in there. No, that's not a Artificer cantrip, unfortunately. But you can basically just give it a cantrip, and you don't have to know the cantrip. It just has to be in the Artificer spell list. So this is a great way to basically have a weapon that you can use at all times, whether or not you have access to magic or anything. The unique thing about this is it actually says you can cause the magic wand to produce the cantrip. It doesn't say you can cast the spell from the wand. So because of that slight distinction, that would mean normal things that would prevent you from casting a spell, like a silence spell, or something like that, won't actually prevent you from doing that, because the wand is the thing that's making it. And the way they kind of justify this is you're not technically casting the spell. You've actually built the wand to do that particular spell effect. So this is a great way to have that backup weapon if you are using, or if you are facing, creatures that use counter spells and stuff like that. They can't counter the spell because it's not being cast. The effect is being produced. So kind of useful. When you reach 14th level, you can put 2 different cantrips in the wand. So it makes it even more versatile. And then the last thing for the Artillerist is 14th level. Any of your allies have half cover while within 10 feet of a turret you create with your arcane turret. And you can summon a second turret for free every day. It also lets you have 2 turrets going simultaneously. So and you can also use one bonus action to activate both turrets. So this really turns it into a very unique position. You can get 2 force ballistas, and with your bonus action, just be firing with both of them. You can get 2 flamethrowers. You can have a flamethrower and a force ballista. You can have a 4th ballista and a defender. Because temporary hit points don't stack, you couldn't have 2 defenders and get double the temporary hit points, but you could have 2 defender turrets at 2 different places if your party is really spread out, and that way you could still cover your entire party. You know, so this really, again, makes it this really cool, you know, turret-based class, and depending on the turrets that you get, you can do some pretty cool stuff with it. So that's the basics of the class. We've already talked about the infusions. We talked about the new spell. Like I said before, I love this class for a number of reasons. First, this is so different than any of the other classes out there. The spell casting is different. The infusions are different. You can play this a lot of different ways. It can be a ranged class. It can be a melee class. It can be a throwing weapon class. You know, you really are only limited by your imagination. And then when you get into the specialist aspects of it, you can have a really cool, interesting, unique class. You have a pet class that actually works. Unlike the Beastmaster Ranger, this is a pet class where your pet feels useful all the time. All the way from level 3 all the way up to level 20, your pet still feels like it's useful, like it can do something worthwhile. And with the artillerist, turrets are cool, man. Going around with a bunch of turrets, especially like I like the Force Ballista. You know, total like Torbjorn type thing where you set up your turret, except these turrets can move, and just go to town. Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments. First of all, what do you think of the class? If you haven't downloaded yet, I'll have a link to the Unearthed Arcana page where you can download it for free, so you can check it out yourself. And let me know, what are your thoughts on it? What are some of the things that you see in here that you think will make the class really strong? Do you think it's a balanced class? Do you think it's going to overpower some other classes? You know, what are your thoughts on it? And also, I am doing my play your faves as part of my D&D content stuff, but I'm still going to be doing these in-depth D&D 5e guides. So what class or subclasses, if I haven't touched on, I know I haven't done any of the Ranger subclasses other than the PHB, and I haven't done that for Warlocks either. So what would you like to see me do next? And you can even suggest DM's Guild classes. Preferably, I would like them to be free or pay what you want, because I'm very much broke. But if enough people are interested in a class that I have to pay for, I'll fork over the money to look it over. Anyway, that's all for me today. I will see you next time, all right? Bye-bye.